Hello, viewers, and welcome to the latest episode of the Huddle. I have with me today Richard Flint, the former CEO of Skybet. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to speaking to you about. There's plenty we can talk about across both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. To start off with, I introduced you as the former Skybet CEO. How do you look back? Obviously, a flourishing brand at the moment in the UK and Flutter generally. How do you look back on your legacy at Skybet?
I mean, I feel very lucky to have had the career. Hopefully my career isn't completely ended yet in whatever form it may take. But I feel really lucky for the time I had with Skybet. Growing it from a relatively small and loved part of Sky in the early 2000s, from a sort of eventually some good growth in the UK market. It took us a while to get things right, which we can talk about if you want. But then we had good momentum from sort of 2010 to 2015 within Sky, and then 3 very successful and enjoyable years as an independent company backed by CVC, and then an eventual exit to being bought by the Stars Group, and then soon after that I joined the Flutter board, which is interesting as well. But really privileged to have had that time, and most proud of alongside the sort of business success we had and the good feedback we got from customers, we built a really strong, successful team and culture. And I still see many of those people around, and many of them have gone on to great things afterwards, either in the gambling sector or elsewhere. And that's certainly the thing I'm most proud of.
Mm-hmm. So you recently left the Flutter board. I think it might be useful if you maybe just kind of update our viewers on what it is exactly you're doing now, and how much do you miss being at the front and center of the gambling industry? Or maybe the opposite.
So I left Skybet after the acquisition, and then there was a period around by the Stars Group, and then Flutter bought the whole thing. And I was interested to join Flutter as the biggest regulated gambling company in the world, and a fantastic company. I did that. And it was a sort of part-time thing. I did that for, I guess, 4 years nearly. But alongside that, I've been trying to work out what I do when I grow up. And I've been, investing and working in different industries. And really, I'm looking for great companies with a lot of potential in interesting sectors, mostly D2C, internet-enabled businesses. And the two that I've really, enjoyed the most is subscription dog food business, fresh dog food called Butternut Box, which has really gone from strength to strength, and then the premium tickets company called Seat Unique. In addition to that, I'm on the board of Lad Bible, and invested in a spin studio called Ride in Leeds, and several other range of investments as well that I'm more passive within. But have I missed? I mean, it's pros and cons. Like doing the range of things that I'm doing at the moment is, you get the variety and you get the interest, and it's great to learn about different industries. But I did very much enjoy, running a company and building a team, and being front and center of things. I won't deny that I enjoyed parts of that, and there's parts that I missed. So, but it's also very stressful and all-consuming running a business. So I think there's pros and cons to both sort of routes, and I've enjoyed both, and I wouldn't say that I'd 100% committed to either one or the other for the rest of my life.
Given you've got kind of a taste of different industries, I know you'll know a lot about how the gambling industry has changed over the years. How does the industry compare? I mean, a lot of people, when they come into gambling, even my own story, they say it's a happy accident, and they end up staying for a very long time because it's dynamic. There's a lot going on. I mean, how does it sort of compare to other industries?
I think it's a fascinating industry, and I mean, it's often at the forefront of technology developments. I think it also is, the connection with sport was always something that was appealing to me. It is a business that had a lot of growth and a lot of disruption. We were able to make something that was successful and profitable. You've got the sort of public perception side and connected to that, the regulatory side, which I think is sometimes very challenging. For a person, I mean, you find this, and many of the listeners or people watching this will find that, you get a different reaction from different people. Like, it's not always something that you sit next to someone at a dinner party, or when I used to go to those things, and you get different reactions to different people. I think a lot of that is lack of understanding, but also I think the industry, it is an industry that can be, the product can be addictive and problematic for some people, and I think the industry is not always portrayed itself in the right light and not always acted in a way that it should, and so some of that sort of criticism has been justified, some not. In part of me finds that interesting in a way because it is a controversial industry and it is, challenging to work in. But part of me also gets a bit sick and tired of it sometimes. And you do get quite a bit of, running a company, you get quite a lot of sometimes unsolicited feedback on social media about the evils that you might be perpetuating, which you have to have a thick skin, I think, to be able to deal with that. And I think ultimately you have to be comfortable in your own head with what you're doing, which I was. But you have to be in that place.
Certainly, I think the social media point is valid because obviously yourself, you're quite active on social media. I mean, a lot of CEOs these days you get a 50-50 mix, I guess, but some CEOs I know will have just specific teams running their social media for them, so they might not necessarily take any criticism too personally because they might never come across it. But obviously, I know you're very active. If we were to zone in specifically on, obviously you were, as you mentioned, Skybet and Flutter. If we were maybe to, as someone who's kind of recently left the board, so you know a lot about the company from the inside as well. In terms of companies doing well in the industry, at the moment you've got Entain not so much in a good space as the industry giants, as it were, but Flutter very much in a good place. A lot to do with FanDuel. As you know, a former executive at the company, what's your kind of take on overview of the company at the moment going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great company and a leader in regulated gambling. I think the biggest brands and the most successful companies in most of the main markets for the regulated markets are owned by Flutter, and I think that is a good model. And I think that there's a lot of, one of the reasons why FanDuel's been successful is they've been able to learn from other different companies within the group, including Skybet. Some really strong people have gone there. There's, some of the technology and the things like the odds setting has been leveraged locally from a sort of more central operation, but quite a good balance between the sort of what's centralized and what's shared and what's localized and focused and independently operated. So that's gone well. I think all of those reasons have made it successful, and I can see that carrying on. I'm sure there'll be ups and downs along the way, but I think the company's really well positioned.
Mm-hmm. When talking about Flutter, obviously recently a major move to kind of go primary listing in the US. The US, as we talk about FanDuel, it's a huge, it's huge in gambling in general, but for Flutter, the US is the main play now. What are your views on the US market as a whole, as someone who, I guess, you specialize in the UK market to begin with, but obviously you've had exposure to the US via Flutter?
Yeah. I mean, the the US market is hugely growing, hugely exciting. It is a state-by-state market, as you well know, and sports betting is legal and regulated in most, but not all states, and some big gaps in certainly California and I think Texas as well, unless I'm wrong. I'm not 100% up to speed.
Florida as well, yeah.
Florida as well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the gaming side is only regulated and licensed in 3 states, or certainly no more than a handful, maybe a bit more than 3. But anyway, there's a lot more gaming, a lot more states that are not licensed for gaming than that are. I think there is huge excitement and growth around it. It reminds me a lot of what the UK was like maybe 15 years ago, and when Sky first got into the space and where the growth was happening, and it was something that was, people saw it as an exciting business opportunity and great from a customer point of view as well. Both those things are true. I'm a little bit nervous that there'll be the same social and potentially sort of political and regulatory backlash as well that we've had. I can see it going through the same cycle. That would be my fear and my view. Although, the counter argument to that is that it's a different country with different views on the role of individual, and with gambling, it's really a trade-off between sort of protection for vulnerable people and freedom for the vast majority that are not vulnerable. And there's no sort of silver bullet. There's no magic answer. You can, I think most vulnerable people really, it's hard for the companies. It's hard for regulation or for individual companies to protect them. But there's some stuff you could do. But those things that you do will restrict the freedom of other people and get in the way. The affordability debates that we've had at the moment, they would certainly help some vulnerable people, but be hugely restricted for non-vulnerable people. And there's sort of, you've got different countries will take different views on and different people in those countries take different views on to what extent you can reduce the freedom of the non-vulnerable to protect the more vulnerable. And some people argue that the US is going to inevitably be different to the UK on that. I think we'll see in the fullness of time, and it may be that it's different state by state.
Mm-hmm. On that basis, is it the case that perhaps, it could go two ways here, is it the case that the US is simply not heeding the lessons learned from the UK? Or is it actually that you mentioned earlier, a similar trajectory? Is this just maybe the natural trajectory of every kind of major gambling market? Obviously, companies are there to make profits, and eventually that just leads to greater regulation.
Good question. I wouldn't say I'm totally confident in the answer. I do. Yeah, part of me thinks it's inevitable that you have to go through this cycle of companies maximizing profits, maybe a bit short term, maybe thinking that their country is different from all the other countries that have gone before, and leading to certain behaviours, or certainly a lack of consciousness of perceptions of the wider public and politicians. And then you get the backlash, and then eventually there's a settling down towards a centre, middle ground, which is I sort of think where we're heading in the UK. Yeah, I think there probably is a bit of that cycle. I think, my view on the US is it's very difficult to do this, but if you could get the industry united to be a little bit more conscious of behaviours that are a little bit short term and certainly don't play out well in the court of public opinion. If you can do that and maybe encourage a certain degree of regulation to stop these sort of more extreme behaviours, then maybe it's better for the industry long term because you reduce the risk of a backlash towards over regulation. That'd be my view. So if but it's very hard to do. You're relying on a lot of a long term view from a lot of different people in the industry, and it remains to be seen whether it'll play out that way in the US or not.
Yeah, there's certainly no immediate right answer. Otherwise, myself and yourself, we wouldn't have anything to sit here and discuss because it would all be decided for us. But certainly, it's a tough issue. There's plenty to talk about in the UK, but I wanted to ask you one more question on the US before we move on to that. Slightly different direction to what we've just been discussing. Is it a fair assessment, and might be slightly controversial, to say that the US sports betting market at the moment actually is almost rather uncompetitive already? Because you have the FanDuels and DraftKings. You've got a couple of challenger brands, and I say challenger, they're big brands and Caesars and BetMGM, but it's certainly not the wide scale of competition that we have in the UK and certain other markets.
Yeah, you have got two players with a lot of market share, but they are competing pretty heavily with each other, and there aren't really barriers to entry are higher than they were in the UK, but still not insurmountable. And you've got ESPN Bet coming in, you've got what's the clothing brand? Fanatics. And you've got Bet365 and you've got BetMGM. So there's a level of competition. And I would say you've got high market share of the two bigger players, but there's still a chance, particularly if those two don't deliver, of other people catching up. I think that the sort of difference in the UK is originally you had the retail brands, the Ladbrokes and William Hill, who had that brand presence and were relatively early online. And they had the sort of biggest share way back in the day. And then the sort of online brands, certainly the Sky Bets and Bet365s and Paddy Power, took share over time. In America, you haven't really had that sports betting retail brand with initial market share. So actually the early winners have been the digitally oriented companies. So, I think that'd be one of the reasons why you've got quite a high concentration and why it might not change in the same way as it did in the UK. You've got sort of players that should be and can be high performers online that are already the bigger companies. So you might not see the same dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I suppose that's a positive outlook, and the key point being that even if there's 2 or 3 dominant brands, this is still not just a monopoly. So I suppose that's certainly a fair point. So UK market, I almost don't have to ask anything. UK market, what are your views at the moment? So much going on, so much potentially changing, a lot of discussion, a lot of consultations. Where do we sit now? You mentioned earlier that we're heading towards a potential sort of middle ground, which I guess is a good outcome, but we've got a long way to go before we ever really have an outcome in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm not in the industry right now, and so I might be sort of a few weeks out of date. But as I understand it, there are proposals for trial periods of affordability checks at different levels. I actually think that they're reasonably sensible, the levels that are being talked about. I think they're about right. And pleased to see not too many product restrictions because that drives the black market. Pleased to see not too many advertising restrictions because that also drives the black market. And I don't think advertising, whilst it doesn't help the public perception of the industry, I don't think it really drives the problematic issues that we've had. So I sort of feel like we are at a sensible place, and I feel a bit like the industry is not in the media all the time like it was 3 or 4 years ago, and part of that's because some of the worst behaviour has stopped, and partly because I think journalists have moved on to other things. So like I said, I sort of feel like we are in a sensible place. There's going to likely be a change of government in the next 6 months or so, so it's going to be less than that now, isn't it? A couple of months. So that's always a time when things could change, but I don't really anticipate it, to be honest. I sort of feel like it's a sensible balance between protection of the vulnerable and freedom for others, and whilst not driving individuals to the black market. Anyway, I hope that's the case. So whether that will lead to market share changes over time, I probably doubt it. I sort of feel like it's settled down in the UK. It's almost a mature industry now, the UK online, which it's taken 20 years to get there, but I feel it's there now.
Yeah, I mean, I would personally agree on the kind of reasonable sort of center point part, but like we talked about earlier, if I was sat here with someone, a current operator's tier 1 CEO in the industry, there would probably be a lot of discussion that the changes are a bit too strict, a bit too unnecessary. But if I was speaking to a strong gambling critic, there's always that polarized opinion, especially in the UK. I mean, it's global, but with gambling in the UK, as you've seen recently, media attention, I think there will always be those two polar opposite viewpoints. And whether they'll ever meet in the middle, truly, human nature, I think, dictates not.
Yeah, I mean, whether they will agree with each other, I doubt. I think I always felt that the critics had a point. I guess I would maybe encourage both sides of that debate to try and at least see where the other person's coming from. And I always had some of the anti-gambling people that were vitriolic towards me as someone that operated a gambling company, which I felt wasn't very constructive. And they assumed that everyone in the gambling industry was evil and didn't care and was just trying to make as much money as they can. And on one side, and then you get some of the gambling operators that think that any restrictions are going to drive everyone to the black market, and all the critics of the gambling industry were anti-gambling, full stop, and were equally, unfair critics. As you get the criticism the other way. So I think both sides had a reasonable point of view, and ultimately it's played out to hopefully a reasonable centre ground for the industry. I think there's still some things to be worked through, and I think exactly how the affordability checks work still needs to be finalized. It's still a trial period, not a sort of endpoint. So there's still things to be worked through, but like a lot of things, I think there's a balance between competing viewpoints, competing interests, competing reasonable points of view, and I hope we've sort of ended up in a sensible place.
Really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon, especially after the latest developments that will happen in the US or UK. But yeah, Richard, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Nice to speak.
And to our viewers, thanks for watching as well.